virtually every religion has some kind of afterlife, and there is something like a heaven or a good place, and something like a hell, a bad place, however you define it. As a philosopher who believes in none of this, how do you analyze the structure of a religious approach to a heaven or a hell?
Okay, well, the first point I want to make is that I agree with the American philosopher George Santayana that if you're going to have an afterlife, the ideal afterlife is not one where there's a radical division into the sheep and the goats, okay, which is eternally fixed. Santayana thought that an ideal afterlife would be one where one would continue to grow and progress and so on, right? And so people who are on the right path could keep going on that path, hopefully. People who were rather nasty or naughty and so on would have a chance to reform their lives and so on. So I think that a much more attractive conception of an afterlife is one where the afterlife has a certain sort of continuity and there's continued development and so on. I think the idea that once you die, everything is fixed and that's it, is not an attractive idea. I also think there are other problems as well.
So would this apply to religions like the traditional Judeo-Christian religion, the Abrahamic religions, as well as Eastern religions?
Well, Eastern religions sometimes have the doctrine of reincarnation and so on, right?
Cyclical approach.
That's right. And I think that's a more attractive idea because the thought is that if you behave badly in this life, you have a rather inferior incarnation, maybe as a cockroach or something like that, right? And if, on the other hand, you've lived a good life, then you can look forward to a superior reincarnation. There's also, of course, the idea that ultimately you can break out of this cycle of life, death, rebirth, and so on, and achieve enlightenment, etc. I think that's a morally superior conception to the conception you get in terms of the religions going back to Abraham, there's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which have this, at least the case of Christianity and Islam, this heaven and hell conception. I think that's morally very problematic. I mean, it's partly problematic because it's usually thought that that's where the majority of us are going to wind up, right? But even if it weren't the majority, even if you thought it was going to be a small group that wound up in hell, I mean, ask yourself this, consider people like Hitler and people like Stalin, okay? Would you really want to see those people tormented forever? And that doesn't seem to me just. I mean, they did some very heinously evil things, okay, right? But these were sins committed, so to speak, in a short period of time, right? And I don't think that those things merit, an eternity of torment, right? So I think that the notion of hell is deeply problematic, right? And I think that, I like the idea that, just as the door is always open to the prodigal son to return, it seems to me that a loving God would always leave the door open. There'd be no hell where the doors are shut and you're there forever, right? If people, so to speak, transform their lives, then they should get to move out if there is a hell and so on. So I think it's morally problematic in terms of the intensity of the suffering, the fact that it lasts forever.
Just a few decades of our lives compared to eternity, it just seems that there's some big category mistake here.
That's right. And look at if you think of the traditional religions, it may be something like a man is tempted by his secretary and commits adultery and has a heart attack, right? And so dies in a state of sin and goes directly to hell, does not pass go. I mean, that seems completely disproportionate, right? That is, it seems to me that sort of thing is really not just, okay, right? And so it seems to me that a religion that incorporates the idea of hell is a religion that does not take seriously the idea of a perfectly good and perfectly just creator.
So you would see the traditional Christian version of hell, to be specific, as almost a logical contradiction to a loving God.
Yeah, I think there's an inconsistency between the attributes that are ascribed to God, being just and loving and perfectly good on the one hand, and the idea that this God has created a place where at least a fair number of the human race are going to suffer eternally.